Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. Every now and then I have guest hosts on the podcast to bring new life and energy into the show itself. It makes me happy to turn over the host seat to people who love a good conversation, and past guest turned friend turned guest host, Dr. Arlene Sanchez-Walsh, is back in the host seat this episode. Dr. Sanchez-Walsh interviewed Dr. Felipe Hinojosa on episode 207 and also appeared as a guest on episode 176. Dr. Sanchez-Walsh's guest on this episode is Dr. Kristy Nabhan-Warren, and the topic of conversation is the book Meatpacking America: How Migration, Work, and Faith Unite and Divide the Heartland. The book is out now from the University of North Carolina Press, and I am delighted to turn this episode over to Dr. Arlene Sanchez-Walsh.
Hello, welcome to the Classical Ideas podcast. I am your guest host, Arlene Sanchez-Walsh, Professor of Religious Studies at Azusa Pacific University. And we are doing a few podcasts to highlight Latinx religion, and in particular, new books. It is the only way to get new books. Well, you should go buy them, but this is a much easier way for me. This one is a great one. It is a masterclass in ethnography. I can call it anything, it's visceral. You can almost feel it and smell it and taste it, and you can hear the killing floor, if you will. The book is Meatpacking America: How Migration, Work, and Faith Unite and Divide the Heartland, by my esteemed guest, Dr. Kristy Nabhan-Warren, who is the V.O. and Elizabeth Kahl Figge Chair of Catholic Studies and a professor in the Departments of Religious Studies and Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Iowa. Kristy, welcome. And first off, tell us why you wrote this book, which started as a study, as I understand, of white and Latinx Catholics, and it became this. So how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to thank you, Arlene, Dr. Sanchez, for having me on. I've been really looking forward to this, and I am a big fan of your work. So it's an honor to be interviewed by you. I want you to know that.
Thank you. No, that was not solicited.
It wasn't solicited.
That was not solicited.
Kristy speaking truth here, capital T truth. Okay, so yeah. And so what I love about ethnography, I think any method, right? You start with, you're curious about something as a scholar, right? And I was really curious about rural America. I was new to the University of Iowa. It was fall 2012. And I just started driving around the state, and I started just kind of checking out rural places. And over the first year, between 2012 and 13, it became clear to me that, I was reading a lot about parish consolidations, parishes closing, and I was also reading about the large numbers of migrants and refugees into the state of Iowa as part of the secondary wave migration into Midwest from like the coastal states. And so this project originally was called Corn Belt Catholicism because I have a Catholic Studies position. I was new to the university, and I wanted my first book that I did here at the university to really be, to really honor the Catholics who raised money for my position, and so I wanted to really thank them through this project. And so I started conducting field work at 3 different rural Iowa parishes. And after the first 2-3 years, I would say I had collected quite a few interviews by then, maybe close to like 70, 75. Every single one of my interlocutors, Latino interlocutors, worked at Tyson in Columbus Junction, or they worked at another meatpacking plant in Ottumwa or Marshalltown, or, in another Waterloo, in another city. And so I knew there was another piece to the puzzle that I was trying to put together, right? And it just so happened that I was working very closely with Father Joseph Sia, who was the parish priest at St. Joseph the Worker in Columbus Junction. And he said, yeah, do you want to have a tour of Tyson in Columbus Junction? I said, I'd love to. And so he was good friends with the chaplain there, and he knew the human resources manager there. And so that was my first foray into a meatpacking plant. And I realized that this was a really essential part of, this had to become an essential part of the book. And so that's what I love about ethnography, right? You start with an idea and, it's a snowball method, right? You start talking to people, they tell you to talk to other people. And not only do we talk to other people, but we go to different sites. And there's been quite a few excellent books on meatpacking by anthropologists in recent years, but none have looked at the intersectionalities, amongst and between religion, work, and migration. And so I thought, wow, there's something really powerful going on here, and I want to explore it. So that's how I got to the meatpacking plant, because of all the stories I'd been gathering.
Thank you. Well, there's tons of stories. We'll get to those in a minute. This is an example, and you say it in the book, and it's probably a little technical, but just for the listeners, if you could provide a broad overview of what is called, quote unquote, lived religion in the context of what you were doing with these meatpacking plants. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to train with Bob Orsi, who is one of really like the godfathers of this method, right? And the method is really about the intersectionalities of what used to be called official piety and popular piety or folk religion, right? Lived religion, it's a disposition, I would say, looking at the messiness, the interplay between, like, in this case, parish life, like what goes on in Catholic parishes and what goes on in other places that we might not always think as qualitatively religious. In this case, meatpacking plants. And so my approach was to go to the places where my interlocutors lived and worked and prayed, because when they go to church and when they go home and when they go to work, they don't turn off religion. Religion is always there. And so I was really interested in understanding, how does their religion and their theological outlooks, their dispositions, how does that work for them in the meatpacking plants? Really, really dangerous places where there's a high risk of injury. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of offal, as you know from reading the book. It's a gruesome job. How does it work for them? Do they just shut it off? And what I found was that many of my interlocutors, whether they're Catholic, Jehovah's Witness, Muslim, or Protestant, religion comes very much into play for them when they're at work. And also what I really what I discovered, it wasn't something I thought I would find, was that at both meatpacking plants, where I conducted research, as you know, Iowa Premium Beef and Tama, which is a smaller plant, about 1,000 animals are slaughtered there a day. And then Tyson Hog Processing in Columbus Junction, 10,000 hogs are slaughtered there a day. And that's actually considered a smaller plant, if you can imagine that. There's amazing. That's amazing.
30,000, yeah. And so what became clear to me was that not only were the line workers invoking religion and how they were talking about work and what work meant to them and how religion helped them cope with work, but the CEOs and CFOs of these corporations were inculcating what I call a religious lexicon in the workplace, calling their workers family and talking about being good stewards. And so it was a fascinating place that I found, meatpacking plants, to explore lived religion.
It's amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. That's really what I'm talking about here. That's why when I saw it advertised somewhere, I was trying to do this series for the podcast, and I said, I need to read this, and as you know, we're super busy, right? We have 100 other things going on, but I just, even before we get really into the meat, no joke, of this book, seriously, it's, I've never seen these put together. There's so many interesting juxtapositions, if you will. Right?
There are.
The juxtapositions of your chapters, it's I don't know if you did it or not on purpose, but it kind of reels you in. It starts with white Catholics in rural Iowa, and you go, oh, this is kind of, I just see corn and fields, and I'm just kind of sucked into the milieu, this Midwestern, because I've driven through that. I've been through there, and it's like, oh, and then you get to these plants, so you do these chapters one at a time, white Catholics, meatpacking plant, more white Catholics, more meatpacking plants, these refugee lives. Why did you choose to do it this way? Why did you choose to put these chapters in this order?
Gosh, Arlene, that is such a great question. And it's something that I usually teach a grad seminar every year here at Iowa. And I've become a lot more intentional talking about the research and writing process with my students. So when we read a book a week, we spend around at least a third of the time in class talking about what it takes to do research. And then we talk about developing their own voice as an author. Like once you're done gathering data, A, how do you know when to stop gathering data? And then B, like, how do you organize it? And yeah, I went into this again, thinking that it was going to be sort of these in-depth snapshots, if you will, of particular parishes, which became part of the story, as you know. Mm-hmm. What I think I ended up, so this was a first book. So this is the third ethnography I've done. This was the first book that I think I didn't have a clear plan when I started it. I just sort of jumped in, right? It was like a cannonball. I just cannonballed right into it. And I didn't really know where I was going, but I just jumped in, And
that's the best. Isn't that the best?
Yeah. And
it's risk, right? I mean, there's risk. Part of a thing of like, there's, because let's just be honest, right? Sometimes we're like, oh, we got to do that again. Right. And we kind of are drawn to the story, right? Kind of like a journalistic thing, a journalistic risk type thing. And then we just, right, and it grabs you and you're going, oh, this is it, right? And so I'm sure when you found this, when it kind of the light bulb goes on, you were like, this is it.
You're so right. I think this was the first book that I was researching, and this was well before COVID hit, and America and the world knew about, like on a broad level, the plight of meatpacking plant workers. So all the field work for this book was done before COVID hit, right? But I knew I had this gut. I always tell my students, if you have a gut feeling that this is a story, go with that gut. And I have learned as an ethnographer that I just can't even tell you, I had tingling sensations. I'm like, this is such a story. Nobody knows that there are these meatpacking plants are in these, remote rural areas, much like the CAFOs. So as I, make a point in the book, the workers, like the animals that they're caring for and slaughtering and packaging, are fungible commodities, and they're hidden from the rest of society. And so I felt very privileged to have entree into this world. And so as I was thinking about how to introduce the precarity of the refugees, migration experiences, coming to a place like Iowa, my God, Iowa in the middle of nowhere, where they might have one relative, right? This is the amazing thing that I'm just so astounded by the refugees that I met, Arlene. So like I've met every refugee I met pretty much, whether they landed in New York or Atlanta or California, Arizona, they might have known like one or two people in Iowa, one person, and they somehow find their way to Iowa or Nebraska or Illinois, and they find that person who has a job for them. So there's this incredible networking that goes on. And so as I was thinking about how to like tell the story, I thought, okay, I thought I wanted to start each chapter with a vignette, a story. I wanted to, as you know, from reading the book, the stories are a really powerful part of the book. And so I start with Rosa's story, journeying from Mexico to join her husband in Iowa with their infant daughter, Katy. And then the second chapter is about homemaking from an Irish German Catholic woman who's in her 90s now, Corinne Hargrafen. And I flip-flop with white Catholics, Latino Catholics, African Pentecostals, Jehovah's Witnesses, because I want to show that each of these individuals are part of this broader refugee networking, right? And I'm hoping that the reader will, when they are done, will be like, wow, those journeys, that the Irish German Catholics had in the late 19th, early 20th century, while they weren't the same as more recent refugees, wow, the poverty, the hardscrabble lives, the outhouse, barely scraping enough money together for their kids to have new shoes. There were so many, as I was coding all of the interviews, like finding common themes, it's like intense poverty, right? Relying on networks, relying on mutual aid societies. Right. That was part and parcel of all the stories. And faith was at the center for almost all of my interlocutors, whether it was Catholic, Protestant, or Islam.
it's you make some astounding claims here, only because I think we all have this. Not we, maybe I do, because I'm an urban elite. Okay, right here sitting in LA, but and towards the end of the book, we'll start at the beginning and go to the end. We'll just jump all over the place. But that religion, its newfound face, its new kind of the new brand is in the Midwest, right? That this demography that's changing. And you call them refugees intentionally. Let's put that out there first. It's either de jure or de facto, but you kind of stay away from all of the other language that criminalizes these people. Which I think is fantastic, quite frankly. And but it seems that at least in rural Iowa, demography is destiny, and I know there's a big debate about that. But in churches, in these meatpacking plants, it adds, I would say, to the anxiety of white Iowans that you found. Well, how can scholarship like this help that anxiety? Can it help it? Did you write it intentionally with that in mind, that you're trying to help maybe soothe the restless souls of folks who are tired of their churches closing and tired of seeing the way things used to be not happen? And I wonder if they even wrestle with kind of the deeper meaning of their anxiety. What do you think?
That's such a great question, Arlene. I'm going to give a shout out to our friend and colleague, Felipe Hinojosa here. Felipe was one of the outside reviewers. He outed himself. He said I could, divulge. He really picked up on the thread of that I was getting across, but I wasn't being intentional enough about it. So he really encouraged me to play it, but no one feels completely at home in these rural places. Whites don't feel completely at home, Latinos and African refugees. No one feels quite at home. And everyone's really trying to do this dance of trying to accept, trying to welcome, but also being really nervous. And I really tried to embrace that more, because I think he's absolutely right. He was such a great reader. I would say yes. I mean, yes, that I wrote this in part for my white interlocutors to try to have a bit more empathy and to also see their own journeys and experiences in the more relative newcomers, right? Because these men and women, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s had very similar experiences as these Latinos in like St. Joseph the Worker in Columbus Junction. And so indeed, I hope that when they read the book, because they are reading it, I think now, that they will, and I really try not to demonize them. I mean, I think one of the missions of the book was to really push back against the tropes of Midwestern places like Iowa being just flyover. You can't wait to get over to the next place, and you can't wait to get over these places because they're red, they're Trumpy, they're hateful, they're racist. And I don't dismiss those claims at all. I just try to say it's more complicated. And I have to say I was nervous for the book to come out, Arlene, because I tried to craft a nuanced argument. And I think that a lot of scholarship, a lot of folks right now don't really want nuances. They want, this is right or this is wrong. And, they're wrong, they're racist. But I'm trying to say, yes, that's racist. But also, I see these white guys who voted for Trump and who, go shooting every week. And I see them promoting Latinos in the workplace. So how do we make sense of that? Right. And so I try to show that we're all inconsistent and we're all really complicated. Mm-hmm. And I hope that the reader will sit with that. I hope when the reader will come away thinking, okay, yeah, I see that. And I have that phrase, the sticky wicket of whiteness, Yeah,
and that was a great.
I'm going
to quote that. I'm going to quote that over and over again. That was great.
I mean, and as a white Midwestern woman, I come from a working class family, but I'm white. And I was very aware of my whiteness when I was in these packing plants and these rural parishes, right? I was very aware of it when I was having coffee and coffee cake, if you ever want to come out here, Arlene, we have the best coffee cakes here.
And me, I'm ready to go.
Everything is in a Pyrex, And so I think I finally shed like the 15 pounds I gained from the field work. But so I was like chatting with the white ladies. And then one of my friends, my Latina friends, came downstairs before the Spanish language mass. And I just switched over into Spanish. We were chatting. It got deadly silent. And my white lady friends like looked at me like I had sprouted 3 more heads. And I don't know if they thought I was talking about them. And I was like, oh, that was my friend, and they didn't like even really know her. And I'm like, So, I mean, these are divided places and these are contested spaces. And so I think, a lot of scholars are writing about what does a shared parish look like? What does an integrated parish look like? And I mean, it's a hard process and there's a long way to go in these places. That's one of the messages I wanted to get across too.
Maybe I get out there, you come out here, we have a drink and we share like ethnography stories, right? That's a different podcast altogether, right? Because it's like, how many times are you kicked out of places, right? Like 2, right? How many times are you threatened with lawsuits? Maybe 1, right? I mean, this is tough work. This is tough work, right? I mean, I'm not saying you were, I'm talking about myself. This is tough. And you're exactly right. I felt that and, great sympathy and really wanted to complexify and not demonize rural whites, because we do have this impression, right, of what they are and what they should be. And you're kind of trying to break those molds. You're trying to help us see a much more complicated side of people, right? But we're in an era where complexity is so risky because it ruins the established narratives that people are very comfortable with right now, right? Which is either with us or you're against us. It's that simple, right? And so this kind of work right now is tough. It's very, very tough. I just want to thank you for that. So let's talk about this chapter, which just blew my mind. The Work of God and Hogs. Lovely title. Okay. Now there are obvious signs, if you will, of religion. There's chaplains. Okay. What were some of the less obvious signs that you found for how religion is helping these workers, Latinos, Africans, Asians, deal with there's really no other way to put it. And I'm a meat eater. Let me be self-reflexive here. I'm a meat eater. I read your book. I read other books. I've read Jonathan Safran's book on eating meat or eating animals, it's called. My daughter's a vegetarian. Other people that I know, vegetarians, vegans. And we talked about this before we went on the air. I think I'm rooted culturally into meat eating. And probably for my health, for everything, it should be better. For the environment, it'd be better. But I don't stop. Right? I don't have bacon every day, but it's hard for me to stop, to give it up, right?
Yes.
So tell me about this chapter. First of all, let me remind the listeners that we are having a wonderful chat with Dr. Kristy Nabhan-Warren, and the book is called Meatpacking America, How Migration, Work, and Faith Unite and Divide the Heartland. So, the Work of God and Hogs. Tell us about religion. Lived religion in this, what can be best described as this awful workplace.
Yeah, it is an awful workplace. As Father Joseph Sia described it, that horrible, horrible plant. So let me just set the scene for readers if you haven't read it. I would suggest that you don't eat meat maybe right before you read these chapters. You might want to get sick, but you pull up to the Tyson plant. And you open your door, and I almost vomited outside. It was the most disgusting smell, and I had to learn how to breathe through my mouth. And I actually, this was before COVID. I actually had to wear a mask in the plant, which that actually helped because you pull up and it smells like unlike any other smell so it's incredibly, to use sort of classical religious studies language, it's incredibly profane, right? Mm-hmm. And when you go in, and I was able to see, the intake of the animals to the final slaughter, to the packaging, to where the packages go, you smell burnt hair from the animals, the eyeballs rolling down the floor, the sows hitting my body. And most of my notebooks have stains on them, from the various misters and splatter. And so,
wow.
These are incredibly bloody and gross places. And so that's the scene. So how can religion exist in such a bloody, violent place with, you hear the wizard saws, which are the little trimming saws. They kind of look like those lighters, like those long Bic lighters that you light candles and fire.
Yeah.
Like a little like razor
Mm-hmm,
knife.
mm-hmm.
And you see the huge machinery, you see the slaughter where the animals are cut down in half vertically. And so one of the ways that religion lives in these places is in the materiality. And as Arlene, you pointed out earlier, I'm very intentional in my books to not foreground theory. Like those of you who know me, my training, I've been trained in theory, but it's really important for me to center my interlocutors as capable of creating their own theory. And so if there's theory, I might mention people here and there. Mostly I mention secondary sources, but the theory is in the endnotes. That's where you can get that. But so I think there's a new theoretical apparatus, like the new materialisms, right? And I know of that. And so if you read the book, you'll know that that's informed it, but
right.
So many of the Catholics, the Latino Catholics, wore rosaries or scapulars underneath their clothing as a protection, like an armor to protect them. They would pray silent prayers or rosary, Our Father or rosaries, like in a meditative stance throughout their line work, right? And so there was an oral component for many of the workers I talked to.
Mm-hmm.
There was literally a material component where they had religion on their bodies. Some of the interlocutors that I quote in the book talked about how they prayed to God to keep them safe because they wanted to make it home to their families. So religion was on the minds of the vast majority of Latinos I talked with, and most of whom are Catholic. Mm-hmm. Religion is also at work. There's a corporate linguistic of faith that I really explore. And in this particular chapter, I became good friends with Joe Blay, who's Ghanaian American, and he's the chaplain there. And I had read Emma Green the journalist Emma Green had written a really great piece on workplace chaplaincy. It was in the New Yorker, Atlantic. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought, oh my God. And then that was right about the time I was doing work at Tyson. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating that there's a chaplain in every single Tyson plant, no matter where it is in the world.
Amazing.
And this intentional Christian evangelization going on in this plant. So these chaplains are like part-time medics, or they like shuttle folks to the hospital. They are counselors. They're also working for the man, if you will. So Joe will have these messages saying, remember, work hard so you can make money for your families. So there's like the panopticon going on there, right? Custodian language, and so it's fascinating. It's disturbing. It's I just think, there's a lot of scholarship now on faith at work. So like Elaine Howard Eklund, she and her crew are doing great work at Rice. Nicole Kirk's work is more historically contextualized with Wanamaker's Temple. So there's a lot of religious studies folks and sociologists doing faith at work now. And so their scholarship was really informative to me as I was like, oh my God, meatpacking plants and faith. And I remember the good folks at Louisville Institute. I had one of those sabbatical grants. When I started to do the meatpacking, they're like, wait, is this religion? I thought, and so I know folks do a double take. And so it doesn't naturally go with what we think of as like a religious space or possibilities for religion.
No, exactly. And what is really, really so fantastic about it is that it's not forced. I mean, you and I have read enough scholarship throughout this field to know when people just try to jam things together and it doesn't naturally flow because it's like they don't know where to put things. You have all these notes, right? You have all these notebooks and interviews like, I really need to use this because it's too good. And then you just try to artificially make it work and it just doesn't. It doesn't add to the flow. It doesn't add to the overall narrative of what you're trying to do. But actually this works, which is amazing because after that you move into this the descriptions are horrifying, right? They really are. I could not do what you did. Okay, so kudos to you, honestly. I mean, I've talked with people who have had near-death experiences, who have come back from drug overdoses, who've been prostitutes, all of that kind of stuff, and their lives are horrifying. Prisoners, horrifying. But the slaughter and the suffering seems so, and also just the fear right?
Yeah.
That there seems to, that's what I got. There's just like it on the line,
Yes.
and how everything needs to be precise.
Yes.
Because you could die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's something about that danger that obviously brings you so close to faith, right? Faith. And I use that word differently than religion, obviously, because these are folks who self-profess, right? That they are Catholic, they are Protestant. So they've already told us that faith helps them somehow. It's amazing. So there's so many stories. Your discussion of how the pork industry helps define Latino life at this plant through work, through food, through religion. What's going on there in terms of, I mean, pork, what puerco, right? It feeds their families. It helps. Hopefully none of these workers that you interviewed want their kids to do this, right? They want them to go to get better jobs. They want them to go to college. They want them to enter the ladder of success, if you will, right? Whatever that ladder happens to be. Okay. But, you know, religion and faith and food. I mean, talk a little about that. And even in your white Catholic interviewees, right? The coffee cake and the sitting down. And I mean, there's a lot of scholarship on that, I'm sure, as you know. Did you think about that when you were writing it? I mean, what the intermingling of religion and food and how all this works and what you're doing?
Absolutely. That's such a good question. You know, I love the late and great Wade Clark Roof had that great chapter. I'm not sure what edit collection it was in. I think it was
wonderful. The barbecue one?
The barbecue. Yeah.
Loved it.
Yes, and I cited in all my religions in America classes. You know, so in that case, how the pig is like like a sacramentalism, right? Like it's sacrament. And so I see the pig in Iowa broadband culture. You know, bacon's everywhere. It's even on salads. You have to like say, please hold the bacon on my salad. You know, it's like it's got everything here. I mean, I remember when I first moved here, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm vegetarian. They're like, oh, it's just bacon. I'm like, well, but bacon's meat. So bacon's like its a whole other category here. It's like sacred. I don't even know. Yeah. Now I'm like, please hold the bacon. Yeah. But yes. And so you're right. Food. I'm so glad you picked up on that. And I love food and I love to eat and I appreciate, there was so much work done with hands in this book, right? Hands taking care of animals, hands killing animals, hands dehiding animals, hands cutting animals, hands making casseroles. And so there's so much craft work, in this book. And so I definitely tried to get that across, whether we're talking about Corinne Hargrafen, when she's talking about growing up in the early mid 20th century, raising her family, pregnant with twins, and food was such a big part of her memory. Hot summer, making cold lemonade in metal pitchers, having capons, which I didn't even know what a capon was. It's like a little chicken, apparently. Yeah. It's like a little poultry. Like I didn't even know. And as a vegetarian, I mean, I learned so much about meat. Right. I even learned how to grade meat. So I was like not officially certified from the USDA guy, but I spent many hours with him and he's like, you've got this down. So I can choice and prime now, like with my blindfolded. But I definitely wanted to get across the care that people take with their hands, whether it's making food for a parish hall or, preparing an animal. So yes, foodways are huge. And, every time one of my interlocutors invited me into their homes, they would always make me food. And it was always delicious and it was always homemade. And it was always way better than I would have made because I am not a very good cook. So my spouse is the cook, but yeah, so foodways are really important. And going back to your original question about pork, there's this relationality, if you will, between humans and animals and the consumption of animals and the killing of animals. And, so whether they're the Latino Knights of Columbus at St. Joseph the Worker, selling carnitas to raise money for the Knights of Columbus, pork that they bought at a discount because they work at Tyson, so it's all interconnected around pigs and corn. And you can't get away from it. And especially, so this is a minority majority parish, as many rural parishes are Latino majority. Yeah, pork is huge. And, I'm thinking of our colleagues, beautiful Alyssa Maldonado Estrada's book, beautiful book, Lifeblood of the Parish. I was thinking about her beautiful book the other day and her title. In a lot of ways, these meatpacking plants are the lifeblood. They're the lifebloods of these communities. They're disgusting and they're awful. They pollute the earth and the air, but they're providing for these families and they're literally keeping alive these parishes. And so how do we reckon with this?
Yeah, that's amazing, right? This thread of blood.
Yes.
Right? Blood everywhere. And it just, you don't have to self-identify as Catholic, which I do, but just like, it's just everywhere, right? There's blood on the floor, there's blood on their clothes. And obviously all of that is sanitized when you get, or for me anyway, in my mind, I get the carnitas, I get the pozole, and you mentioned other foods, and I'm going, yeah, I'm ready for that. It was mouth-watering. And 2-page previous, you just talked about the slaughter. And I was like, see, how did my mind do that? How did I sanitize that, right? How could I do that? I can totally see that people would have read the first part of that chapter, put it away and go, I'm done. I'm never eating pork again. And then I read the rest of it going, ooh, I haven't had that in a while. I wonder how that would taste at the parish hall. That sounds great. It's odd how that works. It's not odd, but it's so deeply, again, cultural, right? But yes, the lifeblood of a parish, the lifeblood of these industries, and how, because of their such precarious economic situations, this is the job that they have, and this is a job that they're going to keep. Right. It doesn't matter how awful it is, because they're self-aware. Am I right? They know how bad it is. And they're not kidding themselves. This is not some kind of mass delusion theory where it's like they don't really understand what they're doing.
Oh, they
completely understand what they're doing. All right. You bring meatpacking alive. Okay, you really do. You can feel it, you can smell it in your descriptions, and how these workers, African, Asian, Latino, Latina, they all want respect for their work, right? And that obviously has a very, the trajectory of that is so long. And it was what I was thinking as when you were writing, I was thinking about factories in the field, right? I was thinking about Carrie McWilliams, and I was thinking about the long historiography and literature about dignity, right? That they just want dignity for the field work, for the factory work, right? They don't want sympathy, right? They don't want to be patronized, right? And you hinted at that with the chaplaincy kind of a thing, that there's this, I don't even know what to say, this kind of evangelical paternalism, right? That just, I don't know where that comes from, but that's there. Tell us about how you view this industry now and these workers after your work has been over, right?
It's a very
what's it like after you've accomplished all of this and you just kind of had to let it go?
That's a really, really, really good question. I love how you teased out, every worker told me, I don't want you or anyone to feel sorry for me, because I work hard and I know very few people could do this job. So that there's an awareness there that this is like a really hard freaking job. I'll keep my language clean here, but there is a pride, and I really came away with that, and I had such a deep respect. By the end of the intensive week at Iowa Premium Beef, I actually got used to the packing plan. It was weird. I found myself understanding how you could go into work and have a cognitive dissonance, because I got used to the blood and the smells and the sounds. I really, even by the end of the week, I'm like, okay, I can get how you can bracket this and how you could do your job, go home and shower, take like an hour-long shower to get rid of the smell, but it never goes away. And then take care of your family. I could really understand that pride. And I write about this. So what's next? And so, as you had asked me earlier about theory. So I've really taken the approach that my books, I want to be crossover books. I really want them to be readable. I don't want them to be jargony and bogged down in theory. I have a lot of problems with ethnographies that do that, to be honest with you. And so I have decided.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that because I'm like, really, I do know theory. I care more about Reina and Rosa than I do Bourdieu, you know?
You know what? I think
So
we're probably been twins in a different life,
I
because
think
it's like
so.
I just want people to speak their stories,
Yes.
because nobody ever asks them. I mean, it's like it's probably the worst job interview response, but that's what I always say, or whenever I'm interviewed, right? And it's like I just want people who've never been asked to speak their stories, to tell their
Absolutely.
story. That's it. Well, how do you contextualize? How do you do this? How do you do that? I'm going, I don't, right? I mean, I can make it fit somewhere, but they're not used to this. They're not used to having their stories told, to having their work respected. Okay,
Yes.
they're often viewed as objects of pity, to be honest, and it's like, oh, poor people, they can't get
Yeah.
anything else. I'm sure as soon as they can, they will move out of that awful business. But you really, really paint a different picture, right? You paint a different picture, and so now after the work is over, what are you thinking in terms of what you saw? I mean, have you had a time to process what you went through?
Yeah. Well, some other folks have asked me about this. I think I had a little bit of PTSD after the field work because I was having nightmares of blood and of cows crying and pigs squealing, and I would wake up sweating, and I'm like, okay, is this menopause or is this like, what is going on? Because that's kind of going on too. And I'm like, what is going on? So it took a while to write. I wrote the chapters around the chapters where I really take you through the packing plants. But once I started writing those, it just flowed. I literally couldn't stop writing. It just came out. So I also decided I have a forthcoming piece in an edited volume about the it's a bunch of existentialist phenomenological anthropologists. That's where I kind of go on with the theory a little bit, and like talking about how I felt in my relationality with animals and, the guilt and all the affect that I felt, so that's probably my more theoretical work. But where I am now thinking about the industry, I have 3 kids, they all eat meat. I don't want to shame anyone for eating meat. I prepare meat for my kids. I'm one of those vegetarians that I'm pretty inclusive. I'm a pretty inclusive person. So I'm like, if we buy meat, let's try to buy responsibly sourced meat. Let's eat it all. Let's not waste. I would love to see the industry shrink. I mean, I think that people are always going to eat meat. I mean, I know like crickets and grasshoppers are the next new protein. I mean, I eat a lot of pea protein powder. I know there's a lot of like fake meats out there, the Impossible Burgers and all that. But I think people are still going to want to eat meat. I just think that the scale that we see at some of these plants, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 killed a day, that doesn't seem ethical to me. And there is a lot of waste in the industry. I would love to see less waste, more accountability on these, to literally clean up, because you drive into Ottumwa or Marshalltown and you'll smell shit. Not to be crass, but it's in these open air pits. That's what greets you when you drive into these towns. Marshalltown, the plant, is literally in the center of a community, like a half block away. Little kids are running around barefoot. It's really disgusting. And so these plants need to be held more accountable. I think there needs to be greater checks into the water quality, because the water quality in Iowa is just terrible. My family and I kayak, and we have gotten rashes. We pretty much don't kayak south of a particular area anymore because the waterways are so polluted with fertilizer from big ag, or just the waste that's been treated but not treated enough. And so I think that we need more regulations, which we saw were very much relaxed under our last president.
Yeah, let's move on.
But I would say I think we need more regulations. We need the EPA to come in and to really, but I mean, I have my eyes wide open with this, Arlene, and I don't think we'll see, meat consumption going away, but I keep thinking, how can it be more responsible, and how can we see unions coming back? Because, this is a right to work state. Workers do make a high salary comparatively, but it's such a high risk job, and I would really like to see unions take hold in these plants.
Well, you did make mention of that. Just to backtrack a little, you set the stage in, as it were, stating that when these plants used to be in larger cities, and obviously the one that we all know is Chicago, right? The what is it, the hog butcher of the world, or whatever that was called. And they moved, obviously, because of unionization, right to work laws, cheaper. It's just cheaper, right? I mean, let's just be honest. They were looking for bigger profits, and it was cheaper, and it often, sadly, expendable workforce. Very much the factory in the field, right? If we can't, if you want to leave, fine. There'll be 100 other people who want this job. Exactly. So essentially, they don't need that, right? Which is unfortunate. That's exactly what I thought you were going to say about the PTSD. Going, I don't know how you could get through this without that, because it almost felt like a war zone.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was like, it was just amazing. And there's no doubt in my mind that religion, it serves as a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
For this awful work, but necessary. You know what I mean? It's just kind of a weird thing, a paradox, right? It's awful, but necessary. And not just for meat consumers like myself, for these workers, right? Exactly. For them to kind of lift themselves out of this horrible poverty that they find themselves in, to try and make a better life. The stories that you told in the book about where they were fleeing from, the things that they had to go through just to get here. Simply amazing. Amazing.
Tried a lot doing this research. It was, I have never felt my white privilege more acutely, and I have to say, if you're struggling with anyone who doesn't think they have white privilege, who's white, needs to do field work with migrants, because there's no way you can get around your privilege. And so it was incredibly humbling to do this work.
Amazing.
Keep me grounded.
We are discussing the phenomenal book, Meatpacking America: How Migration, Work, and Faith Unite and Divide the Heartland, with Dr. Kristy Nabhan-Warren, University of Iowa. One of your many observations about religion is that it can be found in this work through chaplaincies. We talked about the beef, the cattle processing plant. The beef does not have a chaplain, if I remember correctly. And obviously we talked about it already, what they wear on the line, their silent prayers. But you also say, which is really interesting, that institutional religion, for lack of a better word, is on the wane, which is all of the statistics kind of tell us that is true. And what we're measure that by, obviously, is church going, right? For lack of a better word, self-identification, people who self-identify as something else. But people find religion where they spend the bulk of their time, which is at work, right? Is that a good thing?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer that. That's such a good question. I think that people are drawn to places where they can get outside of themselves and they can have certain feelings and affect of specialness, to use Ann Tav's language, right? And so I didn't want to say that a meatpacking plant with all the noises and blood was a church. And I don't think none of my interlocutors would have said that this is church for them, that it's replacing, but it's a place for them to live, to basically, bring in their faith to get through their shift so they can make it home. For the interlocutors I interviewed, many of them are pretty faithful going churchgoers, right? But many of them used to go to church, but they're just so exhausted, from the week. Some of them work on Sundays, right? But some of them, Sunday's like the only day they don't have to go in. So they skip mass because they're just tired and they want to sleep in, So I do think that institutional faith and church going, that I'd say the majority of my interlocutors, church going habits and place, the church as a place figures very prominently in their identity and their memories. But whether or not they're passing that down to their kids remains to be seen. Now, the Africans who are more evangelical and Pentecostal, and the Jehovah's Witnesses I interviewed, for them, going to Kingdom Hall or, or church is very important, but for many of the Catholics, there was more like, well, I go when I can, or Father understands if I miss, and Father Joseph would have taken, the host and wine to their homes. He did a lot of home visits. And so I think institutional religion, quote unquote, is still important for so many folks, even when they don't go to church. And so that's, I think, a problem with a lot of these polls, because even when church attendance is in decline, church as a concept and a place still remains very important for so many people. And so I think we always need to keep that in mind.
I tell you, I don't know. I'm kind of divided about whether it's good or not, because I think work is so overwhelming, and it just, the drive for work is so overwhelming, and it's not in the questions. But now that we can talk about it, this was done before, quote unquote, the Great Resignation, right? And you spend your last part of your chapter talking about how, or towards the end of the book, COVID. Right. And it just starting, probably just as you were finishing up, and getting this thing to go into press. But that idea that they left, people just, because they were scared. I mean, that COVID hit these plants so horrendously, they had to shut down. And all of that's in the book. I just don't know. I mean, work is so, let's use that other religion. Work can be sacred, but often it's very profane. Often it's very mundane. Often it's draining, and it saps you of your time, and it saps you of your energy, right? And so what you're supposed to be focused on, if you will, right, the whole idea of rest, just something, just to rest, is not there anymore. Right? That you're working all the time. You're doing stuff all the time. The what is it? The cult of busyness.
Yes.
Right. I can't do this. I'm busy. Right. And to have religion kind of sacralize that, right. To kind of have chaplains and folks in these plans to kind of have it all be okay. It's like, oh, this is okay. It's fine. It'll be okay because we have this working out here. Right. I don't know. I don't know how good or bad that is. I mean, it's just, it seems like replacing one for the other in a way. And I know it's not replacing. And I know that Pentecostals have to go to church, and Jehovah's Witnesses have to go to Kingdom Hall. They have to kind of, that idea of going to a place, of separating yourself from work is still there. It's just so, I don't know. It to me, it's disturbing. It's disturbing that you can't have one sacred place anymore, or you can't have one sacred moment anymore without thinking about how busy you are. It's tough.
I really agree with you, Arlene. I mean, I really agree with you. And I think I really wanted to problematize this whole new religion in the workplace, this religion of efficiency. And instead of calling workers or employees, they call them family. Really, are they family? I mean, these are just euphemisms, right? To make what's a bloody, these individuals are fungible commodities, like the animals that are harvested, right? I mean, like you said earlier, they can be easily replaced by a new refugee who's waiting in line to get the job, right? And so, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
You conclude with Reina's story. Can you tell the audience what was so compelling about her story for you? I mean, I know what it is, but if you could end this, what I think has been a great talk, really, really good talk, and thank you again for joining us.
First.
What is so compelling about her story for you?
Yeah, well, I really got to, first of all, Reina is not her real name. As you know, most of the refugees, I changed their names, or they would give me a name they wanted to be called, because she happens to not be documented. And so I wanted to protect her identity. So I got to know her really well because she lives fairly close to me, and I know her family and I know her kids. And I just, I drove her kids a lot to their music lessons. It kind of started out, I do a lot of work locally with Catholic Worker House, and my Catholic worker friends had told me, oh, this woman needs some extra help because her husband was deported. And I said, sure, and so I got to know her, and she's one of the few Guatemalans I got to know well. Most of the Latinos I interviewed were Mexicanos. And so, when we look at the Postville ICE raids back in 2008, I sort of mention it in the book, but it's not. Most of those men and women deported were Guatemalans. Most of the Latinos who work in the plants today where I went are Mexican descent. And so I wanted to include her because she's Guatemalan, and she's also part of the broadband meat industry. So I thought a way to start was, Rosa, who did end up getting a job in the meatpacking plant. I didn't add that in the book, but, coming over to the cornfields in Iowa. So we start with corn. We move our way through corn, which feeds the hogs and the cattle. And then Reina works at McDonald's, right? And so we have literally the tail end, we have like the animal as, being cooked and served. That's what she does. So I kind of wanted to take the reader from the corn to the cooked hamburger. And I really wanted to get across. I think Reina's story is so palpable because, she really she longs for Santa Eulalia. She longs for Western Guatemala. She longs to be home, but she had to leave home. Her family was starving. They were picking up cardamom pods to try to sell for a living.
Wow.
And NAFTA is a specter in a lot of this, right? A lot of these refugees coming from the Northern Triangle had been small farmers. Well, they were put out of business because of NAFTA. And then now they're coming over and they're working for some segment of big ag, whether they're feeding animals, castrating animals, or killing animals, or packaging them, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to show that one of the messages that I think her story really drives home is that the vast majority of these refugees miss home. And it's been a hard journey making homes here in the Midwest because they miss home. Many of their family members are still home. They send remittances home. They send a large portion of what they make home, like the lines at Walmart in any small town and rural, you'll see lines on a Saturday and a Friday, I wanted to introduce the fact that, she's a wonderful mother. Her husband was deported and she was a single mom. She's not fluent. She's neither fluent in Spanish nor English.
Right.
Spanish was sort of and I'm not 100% fluent. I'm like maybe close to 80, And so her sons would be they would help us with each other because Canjobal would inflect her Spanish and English would inflect mine. And so I think she and I, we became friends and we really tried to understand each other as mothers and as mothers trying to do our best for our kids. And I really just wanted to, to show that these women in this case are just beautiful people who will do anything for their children. And I thought about what would I have done? Yes, I would have crossed the border. I don't know if I would have registered. And so it got me thinking about, because, we hear a lot of stories I know from both sides of my family, I'll hear, but our relatives came over the right way or the legal way. And I'm like, actually, when you really do some digging, I don't know about that. I think some of them slipped through. And I think that we've really romanticized this, right? And we really washed it. Yeah. And so I was hoping to end the story, and by the way, her husband, she has been reunited with her husband.
Fantastic.
He has applied for his work visa.
Great.
And they are expecting another child and they're in a bigger apartment. So things are going well for them.
Good.
She's
good.
hours at McDonald's. And so I've kept in touch, not with all my interlocutors, but most of my primary ones. So I wanted to end on a hopeful note, but also for the reader to take pause, okay, what can we do to amplify the experience of refugees? What can we do? Do we give money to agencies? Because if we eat less meat, this is the conundrum, right? If we eat less meat, then there will be fewer jobs for these folks, but maybe there'll be better jobs. Maybe there'll be better paying jobs. And so I just wanted the reader to come away with feeling a sense of connection with refugees who maybe felt really foreign, quote unquote, before. That was really the main thrust of the book, to get empathy.
Right. Yeah, I clearly that was there. You definitely care for these people. There's no doubt that just leapt off every page. It really did. It was that's what I mean about good ethnography, right? There is that whole critical distance idea and whatever, right? But it's really you're insinuating yourself into their life. right? And it's like, they don't need you. They don't need to talk to you, right? They don't need to, it's their stories, right? They don't need to share anything with you, right? I mean, you don't live their life, therefore by the grace, right? You don't live their life, okay? And it's like, okay, but my grandfather did, not too much, right? But he was a butcher, he was a meat cutter in a non-union shop, right? And so he knew what that was like, right? And another thing is, I don't remember it from the book, but this is such harsh work on the body, right?
Yes.
That these folks are not going to retire at 65 and go to their summer home, right? I mean, they're not going to sap, again, this mythology and these damaging narratives of immigration and immigrants who just suck all of these services dry. And it's like, they're not going to retire at 65 perfectly embodied to go off and live in Florida, right? As snowbirds. They're going to be, they're going to have arthritis. They're going to, it's going to be a very, very harsh and difficult physical life for them when they do retire. If they get to retire at 65, they may have to retire earlier, right? If we look at any of the statistics about movers, construction workers, truck drivers, meatpacking workers, agricultural workers, they're not like us. We don't choose 65 professor emerita and then I get to write what I want, right? Until I go to the great beyond or whatever. So it's like, it's just so refreshing to see someone insinuate themselves into their lives as you did. And I don't use insinuate in a negative way, but just kind of live aside them for as long as you did. How long did you do this work?
It wasn't like consistent, but it was a little over 6 years.
That's it, but that's how you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
A little bit at a time, and then longitudinally to see like what's happening here.
That's right.
It's just it's amazing. It really is. It's something. And the Reina story brought something to mind, and we'll close with this: the idea of like, I interviewed somebody recently, and he talked about Brazilian immigrants and how they long to return. This kind of myth of return. They are convinced that they're going to return one day, and they miss it so much, because life is so harsh. Through all these networks, the jobs that they have to get, the places where they have to go throughout the United States just to make a living, the housing situation, the healthcare situation, everything is stacked against these folks. Let's just be honest, right? Did you get that sense with any of them? Do they have that desire to go back home? Or are they making their home in Iowa?
I think the majority I talked with have made their home. They have children. Some have grandchildren now. They're rooted now. They're rooted, and there's a longing though. There's oh my gosh, I'm blanking on our colleague's name. Migrant melancholia. Oh my goodness, I have the beautiful book in my mind. So, oh my goodness, I'm blanking right now. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Not my term, one of our Latina colleagues. I'm just blanking right now. I'm so sorry. I think that like with Reina, she wanted to go home. Well, her husband was there.
Right.
She was sick with nostalgia and longing, but now that he's here, I think that most of the folks I talked with want to be here. And because they also see the opportunities for their kids. And if they do this work, their children won't have to. And you were right. Going back to one of your points earlier, none of the meatpacking plant workers I interviewed want their kids to work there. Maybe if they're the CEO, but they don't want them to be line workers because they know that it tears your body up. They know that, it just messes you up.
Yeah. Yeah, without question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the first person in several generations that didn't have to work with her hands. And it's like, that's what they want to say, right? That's what they want their children. That's the goal, right? Mm-hmm. That's the hope, is that you don't work this way. You will not work with your hands. You're going to sit in an office. You're going to do something else. Yes. And that is a primal drive.
Yes.
To put up with it.
Yes.
Right? If you will.
Yes.
What a fantastic talk. Meatpacking America, How Migration, Work, and Faith Unite and Divide the Heartland by Dr. Kristy Nabhan-Warren from the University of Iowa. And this is published by the University of North Carolina Press, if I didn't mention that. Fantastic press. Thank you, Kristy, so much for this. I probably owe you a bourbon somewhere down the line.
Oh, that'd be great. Next AAR that we're in person. Maybe next
that we can do this. That's free for us to travel. I got you. Old fashions on me.
Hasta pronto. We'll do it soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Arlene. Have a great day. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.